probe insulting, it's also extremely dangerous. Former United States Ambassador to the United Nations, Nikki Haley, says this radical move by the Biden administration is doing great damage to America's reputation in the eyes of our adversaries and our allies alike.
Administration was extreme leftist. This is flat out insane, Martha. The idea you've got 1 million Muslim Uyghurs that are being tortured. You've got people being bullied and beaten in the streets of Cuba. You've got Venezuelans that are arresting political protesters, all of which who Biden chooses to sit with on the Human Rights Council. And the U.S. is asking the United Nations, a cesspool of political bias, to come into the United States and investigate us on human rights. We look so ridiculous in the eyes of the world right now.
This scheme by the so-called woke radical left is just the latest tactic in a long-running effort by Democrats to deepen and exploit the racial divide in America. Joining me now, Executive Director of the National Diversity Council for Trump 2020, Bruce LeVell. Bruce, what can we learn from China, Russia, and Cuba?
Well, we can learn that what not to do. And I like the previous interview you had with Ambassador Nikki Haley. You know, I've often said this, you know, my church, our ministry for years go around the world and quite frankly, China, amongst other nations that we can get into that conversation. We have always been upset, especially in the last 20 plus years, of the travesty that goes on, the persecution of well, no religion and other tribes and other religions that are persecuted in China has never been called out. And so it's just so I just can't even know where to begin with this craziness, how they would want to send the UN to our country when it's so blatant, you know, in terms of what's happening in China, what's happening in Cuba, and some of the African nations and many across the world. It's just crazy, Natalie. It really is.
It's so disgusting because when you think of the investigations we should be having into the origins of the China virus, well, we know the origins, but simply holding China accountable. America isn't a leader anymore in terms of where the Biden administration is taking us. They're just inviting the world. Why do you hate America and why should we hate America?
Yeah. And, you know, I've always said this, you know, we used to get really, persecuted for saying, why do you keep saying America first? And that sounds so racist or whatever. Listen, somebody has to be in charge. And I tell my other friends on the left, I said, do you want China or Russia or anyone to be in, do you want them to be the leader or do you want the U.S. to be the leader? Right. So, and it compromises the integrity of this great nation, our Constitution. When we go out and we're trying to, quote, globalize our country, when we don't even put our country first. Right. And this just amazes me that we would even have this conversation or we even entertain something like this, Natalie.
The fact that we're even talking about this as news is just an unbelievable, sad report of where America is right now. But Bruce, I read your op-ed. It was a great op-ed talking about the disinformation campaign with big tech in regards to racism. We don't often talk about that, but the disinformation, whether it's calling President Trump a racist, whether it's the Charlottesville Fine People hoax, those are things that are still online that have been proven to be false.
Yeah. Well, in reference to that op-ed, it's in the Washington Times for the viewers, check it out, Bruce LeVell. And it talks about how big tech and the Democrat machine has pretty much weaponized its communications and information, how to control a voting bloc, especially Black Americans for many years. Starting in the 50s when LBJ says these, quote, Negroes are getting real uppity. We got to give them something. And essentially, I'll just summarize it. He says, well, now we have a way to pretty much control the voting base from here to eternity is what he was essentially after. And I have to say it, Natalie, they did a great job because as well as I do, they've controlled that voting bloc for as well as 90+% for many years until President Trump came along and shattered the record at 13% in his last election in 2020. So it's nothing new and uncommon. It has been weaponized for years. The left has used media, mainstream media, to control a particular voting bloc or control a particular region of people per se. But it's very dangerous and it's toxic, and it will, quote, undermine our great republic if this foolishness and nonsense is allowed to move forward, which essentially you see is resurrecting other great networks like here at One American News and other networks. Not to mention, you saw Getter, my good friend, open up Getter, another new social media platform. This is the only way we're going to be able to combat these type of misinformations, is going to spur, quote, great ingenuity and new businesses that will rise up to combat this silliness. So that's my optimism on the good news as it relates to combating this negative lying news, as you might say, aka fake news.
Exactly. Well, you would never think about, that the lamestream media, that there's such bias there, they own the media, but social media was supposed to be an open platform for all of us to be able to debate, but it is now just like the lamestream media. Real quick, what is your message going forward for people out there that are afraid to post on social media or afraid they're going to get suspended? What's your message to them, especially minorities?
Well, I've often said this. My father, a 3-tour Korean, Vietnam veteran, my whole family. I am here in Atlanta, and I was birthed through the civil rights movement, through my uncles and all of the folks that you see when you come to Atlanta, and you see a lot of my family members marching in solidarity in the daytime, quote, in suits and ties, not at night. Quint hint on terms how to protest, and keep fighting. This is what makes this great nation strong. But in light of that, as I said earlier in this segment, when someone cancels you, you open up your business and you remember how you were treated.
Exactly.
So when you open up your business, you make your promise that you won't be like them, or else you'll be in the same boat. And that's essentially how I started my 27-year business.
God bless you. I wish we weren't coming up against a hard break. God bless you. We'll see you again soon.